The Valani kingdom had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, and no species had ever challenged their power for long. They were the masters of 1,000 worlds, and they knew it well. High Commander Sathos stood in the observation deck of Research Station 12 and watched the stars spin slowly beyond the reinforced glass. His crystalline scales caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. Across the metal walls, what have the patrol ships brought us today? He asked without turning around. Captain Yether stepped forward, and her clawed feet clicked against the floor. She held a data tablet in her four-fingered hands, and her voice carried the boredom of routine. A single alien from an uncharted system, Commander. The species calls itself human, and their world is designated Earth. In their primitive language, Sathos finally turned, and his amber eyes narrowed with mild curiosity. New species were rare these days, and most of the galaxy had already bent the knee to Valani rule. Show me, he commanded. The screen flickered to life, and Sathos felt his mandibles twitch with what could only be described as disappointment. The creature on the display was utterly unremarkable in every way. It stood on two legs, like many species did, but it had no claws worth mentioning. Its skin was soft and exposed, without scales or armor or even a decent shell. Its teeth were flat and dull, and its body was covered in patches of thin fur that served no apparent purpose. This is what our mighty patrol ships captured? Sathos asked with a dry laugh. It was found drifting in a damaged vessel near the outer rim. Yethra explained. The ship appeared to be an exploration craft of some kind. Primitive but functional. Sathos watched the creature on the screen. It sat in the corner of its cell and looked around with those strange forward-facing eyes. There was something unsettling about those eyes, but Sathos pushed the thought aside. It has no natural weapons, he observed. No venom glands or electrical organs. No camouflage ability. How does such a species survive? Unknown, Commander. The xenobiology team is eager to study it. Sathos waved a dismissive hand and turned back to the stars. Let them have their fun. I expect a full report within the cycle. This human will tell us everything about its world soon enough. He was certain of this, because every species broke eventually. It was simply a matter of time and pressure down in the containment level. The human sat alone in its cell and watched the guards pass by. Its name was Marcus Cole, and it had been a deep space navigator. Before the Valani ships had appeared from nowhere and torn his vessel apart, Marcus studied everything. He watched how the guards moved and when they changed shifts. He listened to their language and tried to find patterns in the sounds. He noted which walls were weaker and which doors opened faster. The cell was cold, but not unbearably so. The air was thin but breathable. The lighting was harsh, but his eyes adjusted within hours. Marcus had survived worse conditions during his training on Earth, and he had certainly faced worse odds. Valani scientist approached the cell, and Marcus got his first close look at the species that had captured him. They were tall and covered in scales that shimmered like crystal. Their faces had no nose, but instead to slits that flared when they breathed. Their eyes were large and yellow and filled with a cold intelligence. Human, the scientist said through a translation device clipped to its chest. I am researcher Kethala. You will answer my questions. Marcus stood slowly and walked toward the transparent barrier. He placed his hands against it and met the alien's gaze without flinching. Where am I? Marcus Kethala*s mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. You do not ask the questions here. You are the subject, and I am the researcher. This is how it works. Marcus said nothing. He simply waited. Your world, Kethala continued. Tell me about it. What is Earth? Marcus considered his options carefully. He could refuse and face whatever punishment they had planned. He could lie and hope they would not discover the truth. Or he could tell them exactly what Earth was and watch their reactions. Chose the third option. Earth is the third planet from our sun, Marcus began. It has 1 moon and 7 continents. 60% of the surface is covered in salt water that would burn your scales if you touched it. Kethala recorded this information with obvious interest. The planet has extreme temperature variations. Marcus continued. Some regions are so cold that water becomes solid. Others are so hot that the ground itself can kill you. We have storms that span entire continents, and earthquakes that reshape the land, and life survives in these conditions. Kethala asked with clear skepticism. Life thrives in these conditions, Marcus corrected. Earth has millions of species, and most of them are trying to kill each other at any given moment. We have predators in the water, and predators on land, and predators in the sky. We have plants that poison, and insects that swarm, and microorganisms that can destroy you from the inside. Cathala had stopped recording. Her yellow eyes had grown wider with each word. And humans? She asked. Where do humans fit in this ecosystem? Marcus smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. We are the apex predators. Every creature on Earth fears us or avoids us or serves us. We conquered our planet long before we reached for the stars, but you have no natural weapons. Cathala protested. No claws or venom, or we do not need them, Marcus interrupted. We have something better. We have patience and endurance and the ability to learn. Our ancestors hunted prey by chasing it until it died from exhaustion. We can run for days without stopping. We can survive injuries that would kill other species. We adapt and we overcome, and we never give up. Cathala took a step backward without realizing it. Something in the human's eyes had changed, and she did not like it. You should know something, Marcus said quietly. I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of this cell or your tests or whatever you have planned. I have faced worse than you, and I am still standing. He pressed his palm flat against the barrier and leaned closer. And I am going to find a way out of here. Cathala hurried away from the cell and did not look back. She told herself that the human was bluffing and that its words meant nothing. It was just a soft creature from a primitive world, and it would break like all the others. But her hands were shaking as she wrote her report, and she could not forget the look in those strange forward-facing eyes. There had been no fear there, and no desperation, and no acceptance of defeat. There had only been calculation and patience and something that looked terribly like hunger. 3 days later, the guards reported that the human had not slept. It simply paced its cell and watched and waited. They increased security around the containment level, and no one could explain exactly what human made them nervous, and nervousness was not something the Vellani experienced often. They were conquerors and rulers, and they feared nothing in the galaxy but something about this creature from the primitive world called Earth made them check their weapons twice and look over their shoulders in the dark corridor. Something was wrong, and none of them could name it yet. 2 weeks had passed since the human arrived at Research Station 12, and the scientists had stopped laughing. They had stopped joking about the soft creature from the primitive world. They had stopped feeling superior now. They only felt afraid. Researcher Cathala stood before the High Commander, and her voice trembled as she delivered her report. The data tablets in her hands contained information that defied everything the Vellani knew about biology and survival. The subject refuses to break. Commander, she said, we have tried everything in our standard protocols, and nothing has worked. Sathos leaned forward on his throne, and his amber eyes narrowed with irritation. Explain what you mean by everything. Cathala took a deep breath and began. We increased the gravity in its cell to 3 times the Earth standard. We expected the creature to collapse and beg for mercy within hours' end. It struggled at first. It fell to its knees and could barely move. But then something unexpected happened. Cathala pulled up a video recording, and the screen showed the human lying on the floor of its cell. Its muscles strained and its face twisted with effort. But it was not crying or begging. It was doing exercises. The creature began deliberately training its body against the increased gravity, Cathala explained. It performed repetitive movements designed to strengthen its muscles. Within 5 days, its body had adapted to the new conditions, and it was walking normally again. Sathos said nothing. His claws tightened on the armrests of his throne. We then tried temperature extremes. Cathala continued. We lowered the temperature to near freezing, and the human shivered violently. We raised it to levels that would kill most carbon-based life, and the human sweated profusely. But it survived. Sathos guessed it survived both extremes. Commander, its body has remarkable thermal regulation systems. It can function in temperature ranges that span nearly 100 degrees. The room had grown very quiet. The other officers and advisors exchanged uneasy glances. We tried chemical methods next, Cathala said. We introduced a neurotoxin into its food supply. This compound paralyzes Vellani instantly and kills most species within minutes. What happened to the human? Cathala's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. It became violently ill. It vomited and convulsed for 6 hours. We believed it was dying, but by the next morning it was standing again and demanding water. Its body had somehow neutralized the poison. Sathos rose from his throne and walked toward the observation window. Below him, the research station sprawled across the asteroid like a metal spider. Somewhere in those corridors, a single human was making fools of his entire scientific division. "Tell me about its psychology," he ordered. "Surely its mind is weaker than its body." Cathala hesitated before answering. "We attempted sensory deprivation. We removed all light and sound from its cell for 72 hours. Most species begin to hallucinate and break down within the first day. And the human? When we restored the lights, the human was sitting calmly in the center of the cell. It had used the time to meditate and organize its thoughts. It thanked us for the rest." Sathos spun around, and his scales flared with anger. "It thanked you?" "Yes, Commander." It said the silence helped it think more clearly. One of the military advisors stepped forward. His name was General Vethros, and he was the oldest Vellani in the room. He had conquered dozens of worlds and broken hundreds of species. "I have studied the patrol reports from the sector where this creature was found," he said. "I believe I understand what we are dealing with." "Then speak." Sathos commanded. Vethers activated his own data tablet, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed a planet covered in blue and green and white. "This is Earth," he said. "The human homeworld. I have analyzed all available data, and the results are disturbing." The display zoomed in to show various regions of the planet. Mountains and oceans and forests and deserts. "This world is a death trap," Vethros explained. "The atmosphere contains a corrosive gas called oxygen that would destroy most organic compounds. The surface is bombarded by radiation from its star. The magnetic field is unstable and causes unpredictable weather patterns, yet life exists there." Another advisor asked. "Life dominates there," Vethros corrected. "The planet is crawling, with millions of species locked in constant competition for survival. The humans evolved in this environment. They are the product of billions of years of brutal natural selection." He pulled up more data. "Their species classification is particularly troubling. They are persistence predators." Cathala nodded. "The human mentioned this during our first interview. I did not fully understand what it meant." "It means they hunt by exhaustion," Vethros explained. "Their ancestors did not rely on speed or strength or venom. They simply followed their prey until it collapsed from fatigue. They can run for days without stopping. They can track a target across any terrain. They never give up." Sathos felt something cold settle in his chest. It was an unfamiliar sensation, and it took him a moment to recognize it. "Fear there is more." Vethros continued. "Humans are social creatures with an extremely developed sense of loyalty. They form bonds with other members of their species and will sacrifice themselves to protect those bonds. They call this pack behavior. We are not threatening its pack," Sathos pointed out. "It is alone here. That may not matter, Commander. I reviewed the transmission logs from the captured vessel. Before we disabled its communications, the human sent a distress signal. Toward the outer rim, the room erupted in alarmed chatter. Sathos raised a hand for silence. "Did anyone receive this signal?" "Unknown, Commander. But if there are more humans in this region of space, they now know that one of their kind is missing." Sathos turned back to the observation window and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there in the darkness, a species of persistence predators might be looking for their lost pack member. "Double the guards on the containment level," he ordered. "Increase all security protocols to maximum. I want that human watched every moment of every day." "What about the research, Commander?" Cathala asked. "Continue your studies, but do not underestimate this creature again. It is more dangerous than anything we have encountered before." Down in the containment level, Marcus Cole heard the heavy footsteps of additional guards taking their positions. He saw the new security cameras being installed in the corners of his cell. He noticed the nervous way the scientists looked at him. Noah smiled to himself and continued his exercises. His body was stronger than it had been when he arrived. The high-gravity training had increased his muscle density, and his endurance had improved. From the temperature tests, everything the Vellani did to break him only made him harder to break. They did not understand this because they had never encountered a species forged by a world as harsh as Earth. Marcus finished his routine and sat down to rest. He had been counting the days and memorizing the patrol schedules. He had learned enough of the Valani language to understand basic commands. He had identified the weak points in the cell structure. He was not ready to escape yet, but he was getting closer every day. The kingdom had conquered 1,000 worlds, and they thought they knew everything about breaking prisoners, but they had never faced a human before, and they were learning the hard way that some things could not be broken, some things could only be made stronger. 19 days. That was how long Marcus had spent loosening the single bolt beneath his sleeping platform. He worked only during the guard rotations when the cameras briefly pointed away from his corner of the cell. He used his fingernails at first until they cracked and bled. Then he used a small piece of hardened food that he had hidden in his cheek during meals. The Valani thought they were watching him constantly, but they did not understand human patience. They measured time in minutes and hours while Marcus measured time in whatever it took to get the job done. On the 20th day, the bolt came free and Marcus held it in his palm like a treasure. It was small and sharp, and it was the first weapon he had touched in nearly a month. He waited 3 more days before he made his move. He needed to understand the patrol patterns completely, and he needed the guards to become comfortable with his routine. Complacency was a weapon too, and Marcus knew how to use it. The moment came during the night cycle, when the station lights dimmed and the guards moved with slower steps. Marcus stood in the center of his cell and raised his hands above his head. "I surrender," he shouted. "I am ready to cooperate with your research." The guards exchanged confused glances. This was not expected behavior. The human had resisted everything for weeks, and now it wanted to surrender. One of them approached the cell barrier and spoke into his communicator. "The subject claims it wishes to cooperate." Requesting instructions, the response came quickly. Researcher Cathala wanted to interview the human immediately. She had been waiting for this breakthrough, and she was not about to let the opportunity pass. Guards opened the cell, and Marcus stepped out with his hands still raised. His eyes darted around the corridor and noted every detail. The distance to the nearest junction was 12 meters. The guards carried plasma weapons on their left hips. The emergency lighting panels were spaced every 5 meters along the ceiling. They escorted him toward the research laboratory, and Marcus counted his steps. He memorized the turns and the door codes that the guards entered. The station layout was becoming clear in his mind, like a map drawing itself. Cathala was waiting in the laboratory with her recording equipment ready. She looked at Marcus with a mixture of triumph and lingering unease. Something about his calm demeanor did not feel right. "You have decided to cooperate," she said through the translator. "This is wise. Tell me what changed your mind." Marcus lowered his hands slowly and looked around the room. There were 3 guards positioned at the door, and Cathala stood near a console, covered in blinking lights. Various instruments and tools were scattered across the work tables. "I realized that resistance was pointless," Marcus said. "Your technology is superior and your forces are overwhelming. I am just one human, and I cannot fight an empire." Cathala's mandibles clicked with satisfaction. "This is the truth. You should have accepted this from the beginning. Now we can proceed with the research in a more civilized manner." Marcus took a step closer to the nearest work table. The guards tensed but did not stop him. "I have one request," he said. "Before we continue, I would like to understand your species better. Knowledge should flow in both directions." "A reasonable request," Cathala agreed. "What do you wish to know?" "Your eyes," Marcus said. "They are adapted for bright light. The yellow pigmentation suggests a homeworld with a powerful sun. Am I correct?" Cathala was impressed. The human was more observant than she had expected. "Yes. The Valani evolved on a world with intense stellar radiation. Our eyes filter light efficiently." Marcus nodded slowly. "So you would have difficulty seeing in complete darkness." Before Cathala could respond, Marcus moved. He grabbed a metal tool from the table and hurled it at the lighting panel above the door. The panel shattered and sparks rained down on the guards in the same motion. Marcus dove toward the main console and found the emergency power switch. He had watched Cathala use it during previous sessions, and he knew exactly where it was located. Lights went out, and the laboratory plunged into absolute darkness. The Valani guards shouted in confusion. Their eyes were useless in the blackness, and they fired their plasma weapons wildly. The bright flashes only made the darkness seem deeper when they fitted. Marcus did not need to see. He had memorized the room during his brief examination. He moved low and fast toward the door while the guards stumbled over equipment, and each other felt a clawed hand grab his shoulder, and he twisted sharply. The bolt he had hidden in his palm found the soft tissue between the guard's scales, and the grip released with a hiss of pain. The corridor outside was dimly lit by emergency panels, and Marcus ran. His bare feet slapped against the metal floor, and his heart pounded in his chest. He had maybe 60 seconds before the station went to full alert. Turned left at the first junction, and then right at the second. The map in his mind guided him toward the engineering section. That was where the communications ray would be located, and that was where he needed to go. Alarms began blaring throughout the station, and red lights flashed in every corridor. Marcus pressed himself against a wall as a squad of guards rushed past. They were heading toward the laboratory, and they did not think to look behind them. Captain Yethra intercepted him in the engineering bay. She stood between Marcus and the communications console with four-armed soldiers at her back. Her plasma rifle was aimed directly at his chest. Stop running, human, she commanded. There is nowhere left to go. You are trapped on a station in deep space, surrounded by enemies. This escape attempt was foolish. Marcus was breathing hard, but he was not afraid. He looked at Yethra, and then at the soldiers behind her, and then at the console. That was so close yet so far away. I am not trying to escape, he said. Yethra's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Then what are you doing? I am sending a message. Marcus reached for the light switch on the wall. Yethra saw the movement and shouted for her soldiers to fire, but she was too slow. The engineering bay went dark. Plasma bolts lit up the room in brilliant flashes, but Marcus was already moving. He had trained in darkness on Earth, and he had practiced in his cell. During the sensory deprivation tests, the Vellani were blind, but he was not heard the guards colliding with each other and with the equipment around them. He slipped between them like a shadow and reached the console. His fingers found the controls, and he began entering commands. Soldiers grabbed him eventually. They pulled him away from the console and threw him to the ground. They beat him with their fists and their weapons until blood ran from his nose and mouth. But it was too late. Transmission had been sent. The coordinates were flying through space toward the outer rim, toward the uncharted sectors, where human exploration vessels might be listening. Yethra restored the lights and looked at the console display with horror. The message was simple but devastating. Captured by alien species. Research station coordinates attached. They have others. Come get us. What have you done? Yethra demanded. Marcus spat blood on the floor and smiled through broken teeth. I called my pack. They dragged him back to his cell and doubled the guards. They sealed the engineering bay and changed every access code in the station. They did everything they could think of to contain the damage, but the message was already out there, in the darkness between the stars. And somewhere in that darkness something had received its anything was coming, and the kingdom did not know what they had awakened. High Commander Sathos stared at the decoded transmission and felt the cold grip of fear tighten around his heart. The message was simple, but its implications were staggering. They have others, he read aloud. What does this mean? General Vethros stepped forward with a data tablet containing intelligence reports from across the kingdom. His face was grim and his voice carried none of its usual confidence. Commander, I have been investigating this matter since we captured the human. I ordered a full review of all alien prisoners currently held in Vellani facilities. And what did you find? Vethros activated the holographic display, and dozens of images appeared floating in the air. Each image showed a human face, some male and some female, some young and some old, all of them watching the cameras with those strange forward-facing eyes. There are 47 humans scattered across our territory, Vethros reported. They were captured over the past 3 years from various exploration vessels. We never realized they were from the same species until now. Sathos walked among the holographic faces and examined each one. They looked so fragile and so harmless. Soft skin and dull teeth and no natural weapons to speak of. Where are they being held? Mining colonies, research stations, prison worlds. They have been distributed throughout our space without any central coordination. Or so we believed. What do you mean by that? Vethros pulled up a new set of data, communication logs and guard reports, and surveillance footage from a dozen different facilities. I found anomalies at every location, Commander. The humans are doing things that make no sense according to standard prisoner behavior. They are not trying to escape or resist. They are adapting and integrating. He pointed to one set of reports. On Mining Colony 7, a human female has spent the past 18 months learning our engineering systems. The guards thought she was simply trying to make herself useful. They did not realize she was memorizing every technical detail. Another set of reports appeared. At Research Station 4, a human male organized a work strike among the other prisoners. Different species, who had never cooperated before, suddenly refused to work until conditions improved. The human taught them how to negotiate, and another. On Prison World 9, a human has befriended the guards so completely that they bring him extra rations and share personal information. They trust him, and they do not understand why they trust him. Say those felt his scales prickle with unease. They are not acting like prisoners, no, Commander. They are acting like infiltrators. They have been gathering intelligence and building alliances and waiting for something. I believe that something is the transmission our prisoner just sent. The room fell silent as the weight of this information settled over everyone present. 47 humans scattered across the kingdom, and all of them working toward the same unknown goal. How is this possible? One of the advisors demanded. They have no way to communicate with each other. They do not know the other humans exist. That is what I thought as well, Vethros admitted. But consider their species characteristics. They are persistent predators with advanced social bonding. They evolved to coordinate in groups and pursue long-term objectives. He pulled up more data. Every human we captured knew the distress protocols. Every human knew to survive at any cost and wait for rescue. This is not coordination after capture. This is coordination before capture. They trained for the scenario. Say those thought about the human in his cell. Marcus Cole, who had endured weeks of torture without breaking, who had learned their language by listening, who had planned his escape down to the smallest detail. They knew they might be captured. Say those realized. They prepared for it, yes, Commander, and now they have sent a signal to their home world. The question is whether anyone will come. Captain Yethra entered the command center with fresh reports clutched in her hands. She looked shaken, and her scales had lost their usual luster. We have intercepted communications from the outer rim, she said. There is activity in the uncharted sectors. Multiple vessels are changing course and converging on a single location. How many vessels? We cannot determine exact numbers. Our sensors are not designed for that region of space. But the energy signatures suggest at least 50 ships. General Vethros made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. 50 ships against the Velani Armada. That is not a rescue mission. That is a suicide run, unless they do not care about the odds. Sathos said. Quiet. Liveryon in the room turned to look at him. The human in our cell told researcher Cathala about his species. Sathos continued. He said they crossed oceans in wooden boats knowing they might die. He said they split atoms knowing they might destroy themselves. He said they reached for the stars knowing they might never return. He walked to the observation window and stared at the darkness between the stars. They do not calculate whether they can win. They decide that they will not lose. There is a difference. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. What are your orders, Commander? Vethros Askidzythos was silent for a long moment. He thought about his ancestors who had conquered 1,000 worlds. He thought about the pride of the Velani people who had never known defeat. He thought about the soft, harmless creatures who refused to reinforce all facilities holding human prisoners. He finally said, "Increase patrols along the outer rim and prepare the fleet for potential engagement." You believe they will actually attack us? Yethra asked with disbelief. I believe they will try, Sathos replied. And I am beginning to think that trying might be enough. Down in his cell, Marcus Cole sat with his back against the wall and his eyes closed. His body ached from the beating, and his face was swollen with bruises. But none of that mattered. The message had been sent. His people knew where he was, and somewhere out there in the vastness of space, 46 other humans were receiving the same information. Through channels the Velani would never detect. He had been waiting, patient and quiet, and preparing for this moment. They had learned languages and systems and weaknesses. They had made allies among the other prisoners. They had planted seeds that would bloom when the time was right. The time was almost right. Marcus opened his eyes and looked at the guards, watching him through the barrier. They were nervous now. They had seen what he could do, and they knew there was more coming. They just did not know. Waith smiled, and the guards looked away. They did not like that smile. It was the smile of a predator who knew the hunt was about to begin. The kingdom had held humans for 3 years. They had studied them and tested them and tried to break them. But they had never understood them. Humans did not abandon their own. Humans did not forget. Humans did not give up, and now the humans were coming. Not because they thought they could win, but because leaving their people behind was simply not an option. The Vellani measured war in terms of numbers and technology and strategic advantage. They had 10,000 years of conquest to prove their superiority, but they had never faced an enemy that would charge into impossible odds simply because surrender was unthinkable. They had never fought a species that considered death preferable to abandoning a Pakmatethi. We're about to learn what that meant, and the lesson would shake the foundations of their kingdom. The Vellani kingdom had ruled the stars for 10,000 years, and they had never been invaded. No species had ever been foolish enough to bring war to their doorstep. No fleet had ever challenged their supremacy in their own territory until no High Commander Sathos stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the sensor displays with growing disbelief. The human ships had dropped out of hyperspace 3 hours ago, and they were burning straight toward the heart of Vellani space. 53 vessels confirmed. The sensor officer reported, configuration unknown. Weapon systems appear to be primitive, plasma-based technology primitive. General Vethros repeated with a humorless laugh. Everything about them is primitive. And yet here they are. Sathos studied the tactical display and felt a strange mixture of contempt and unease. The human fleet was laughably small compared to the armada he had assembled. His ships outnumbered them 20 to 1, and his technology was centuries more advanced. It should be an easy victory. It should be a massacre. But something about the way the human ships moved made him hesitate. They flew in a tight formation, with perfect coordination. They did not scatter or retreat when they detected the Vellani armada. They simply adjusted their course and kept coming. Open a communication channel, Sathos ordered. I wish to speak with their commander. The screen flickered and a human face appeared. It was an older female with gray hair and scars across her cheek. Her eyes were the same unsettling forward-facing design as the prisoner in his cell. Eyes that watched and calculated and never looked away. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force, she said. You have 47 of our people. We have come to bring them home. Sathos leaned forward in his command chair. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Your ships are primitive. Your fleet is insignificant compared to the forces arrayed against you. This is suicide. Admiral Chen smiled, and it was the same smile that Marcus Cole had shown his guards. The smile of a predator who was not afraid. Yeah, we know. We do this a lot. The tactical display updated with new combat data, and Sathos saw that the human ships had increased their acceleration. They were not slowing down. They were not changing course. They were charging directly at his fleet. You should understand something about humanity, Commander. Chen continued. We crossed oceans in wooden boats. We split the atom. We looked at the void of space and said we want to go there. Her eyes hardened. We do not calculate whether we can win. We decide that we will not lose. There is a difference. There is no difference when you are dead. Sathos replied, then I guess we will have to not die. The communication channel closed, and the human ships opened fire. The first volley struck the Vellani vanguard, and 3 cruisers exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Sathos stared at the display in shock. The human weapons were supposed to be primitive. They should not have been able to penetrate Vellani shields. But the cruisers were gone, and more shots were incoming. Return fire, he commanded. All ships engage the enemy fleet. The battle erupted across the void of space. Plasma bolts and missiles and energy beams crisscrossed the darkness. Vellani ships swarmed around the human vessels like predators surrounding wounded prey. But the humans did not fight like wounded prey. They fought like cornered wolves. Every time a Vellani ship moved to flank them, the humans adjusted their formation. Every time the armada pressed an advantage, the humans found a way to counter it. They used asteroids for cover and created kill zones with overlapping fields of fire. They kept coming, ship after ship taking damage that should have destroyed them. Crews fighting through hull breaches and system failures. Pilots making maneuvers that pushed their bodies beyond safe limit zone. Human destroyer. had lost half its engines and was venting atmosphere from a dozen wounds. Instead of retreating, it accelerated directly into a Villanthi battleship and detonated its reactor at point-blank range. Both ships vanished in a sphere of fire. They are insane, Vethros whispered. They are throwing away their lives, no, Sathos realized. They are buying time. He looked at the tactical display and saw what the humans were really doing. While the main fleet engaged his armada, smaller vessels were breaking off and heading toward the stations and colonies where the prisoners were held. They are going for their people, he said. The battle is just a distraction, Captain Yethra confirmed his suspicion. Commander, we have reports from multiple facilities. Human ships are entering orbit and deploying boarding parties. Our ground forces are being overwhelmed, the reports kept coming. Mining Colony 7 had been breached and the prisoners were being evacuated. Research Station 4 was under attack and the guards were falling back. Prison World 9 had lost communication entirely, and then the reports started coming from places that held no human prisoners. Other species that had been watching and waiting were rising up. The alliances the humans had built over 3 years were active. Prisons were seizing weapons and fighting alongside the boarding parties. Workers were sabotaging systems and opening doors. Guards who had befriended human captives were surrendering without resistance. This was their plan all along, Sathos understood. They were never just prisoners. They were seeds. The human fleet was down to 31 ships now. They had lost 22 vessels and thousands of lives, but they had not retreated. They had not surrendered. They had not stopped for a single moment. Admiral Chen appeared on his screen again. Her bridge was damaged and fires burned behind her. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were still sharp. We have recovered 44 of our people, she said. 3 more to go. You might want to consider surrendering before this gets any worse. Sathos looked at his tactical display. His fleet still outnumbered the humans, but his losses were mounting. His stations were falling. His territory was in chaos. Why? He asked. Why sacrifice so much for 47 individuals? Chen stared at him through the screen, and for a moment something like pity crossed her face. Because they are ours. Because we do not leave our people behind. Because this is what it means to be human. She leaned forward. We will fight to the last ship and the last breath. We will ram our burning hulks into your fleet. We will die before we abandon a single member of our pack. Can you say the same about your soldiers? Sathos looked around his bridge and saw the fear in the eyes of his crew. They were Villanthi. They were conquerors. But they had never faced an enemy like this, an enemy that did not care about survival, an enemy that fought for something beyond victory. Stand down, Sathos said quietly. Vethros turned to him with shock. Commander, I said stand down. All ships cease fire and withdraw from the human fleet. The order went out and the battle slowed. The Villanthi ships pulled back and the humans did not pursue. They gathered their wounded vessels and continued toward the remaining stations. Admiral Chen nodded slowly on the screen. A wise decision, Commander. I have not surrendered, Sathos clarified. I am simply recognizing that this battle cannot be won. Not today. Not like this. Fair enough. We will collect our people and leave your space. But you should know that this is not over. I know, Sathos replied. You have shown us what you are, and I suspect the galaxy will never be the same. The human fleet recovered the last 3 prisoners and jumped to hyperspace. They left behind debris fields and burning stations and a kingdom that would never forget this day. Sathos watched them go and felt something he had never experienced. In his long military career, respect Villanthi had conquered 1,000 worlds, and they had thought they knew what strength meant. But the humans had taught them a different definition. Strength was not about numbers or technology or territory. Strength was about refusing to give up. Strength was about fighting for your people against impossible odds. Strength was about deciding that some things mattered more than survival. The kingdom would recover from this battle. They would rebuild their stations and replace their ships. They would count their dead and analyze their failures, but they would never forget the day 53 primitive vessels charged into the heart of their empire and rescued 47 prisoners. They would never forget the species that looked at certain death and smiled. They would never forget humanity. And in the darkness between the stars, the stories spread, whispered by traitors and prisoners and rebels who had seen what happened. The soft creatures from the death world had challenged the Villanthi and Survived other species began to wonder what else might be possible. If kingdom had ruled for 10,000 years, but the humans had shown that 10,000 years could end, and that was only the beginning.